Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, Ms. Dietz. Thank you for your presentation and your very specific recommendations. I can't tell you how delighted I am to learn that now in our region we have CLIMAtlantic. It's exactly the kind of institutional capacity we've needed for some time. Over the years, an equivalent organization in Quebec, URENUS, has been called on by the New England governors and Eastern Canadian premiers to brief them regularly, back when I used to attend those meetings annually. And I thought at the time, boy, it would be great to have something like that in Atlantic Canada, because we need to collaborate together within our region. I'm a strong proponent of the idea that if we don't hang together, we're going to hang alone. So this is really encouraging. I had a few questions I wanted to ask. One is with respect to the Council of Atlantic Premiers, will you be briefing them at their next regularly scheduled meeting?
If I get a request, by all means. So any province just needs to request us to provide a briefing to wherever they want. Our role is to be of service to the provinces as well. Great.
Thanks for letting me know about that. I wanted to ask some questions on your recommendations. So with respect to the idea or the recommendation for undertaking a New Brunswick climate risk assessment, who would be the lead for that? Who would you recommend be the lead in making that happen?
Well, it could be done in different ways. I mean, you likely will need some consultants to support that work. There is no question in my mind, but I think it's the adaptation group at the Department of Environment and Climate Change, Environment and Local Government in the Climate Change Secretariat, just because there is the most of the expertise is in that team. And it will have to draw on many other departments as well, Department of Health, Department of Social Development, because it should also include issues like social vulnerability in there, not just impacts directly from the hazards, but, where are our vulnerable people, where are our vulnerable infrastructure. So complicated, should be coordinated by government, but likely with aspects that can be contracted out, subcontracted.
So do any of the other Atlantic provinces have climate risk assessments completed or underway right now?
Yes, Newfoundland, I haven't seen it, but I know it's completed. Prince Edward Island just completed theirs, and I think it's public. I should have checked that. Nova Scotia is in the process of completing theirs. So there's quite a bit of expertise in the region already on how to do this, what's good to include, what are the challenges with some of the processes, when you start including social vulnerability indices in the process complicates things, and what kind of variables you want to include. But some really interesting work being done, finished in Nova Scotia currently, and the Prince Edward Island, we had a presentation from Prince Edward Island about theirs. Very interesting process. Very good examples.
That's excellent. So we should be able to hit the ground running when we launch this, which based on that, I'm glad to hear it. I know that nationally, the federal government has already launched the development of the Canadian adaptation strategy. There was a nice write-up in the Globe and Mail on January 11th. For anyone who can access it online these days. In it described their intent is to have something finished by the end of the year, before the end of the year, when they've divided it up into 5 advisory tables, one dealing with health, one dealing with infrastructure, one dealing with nature, one dealing with economy, and one dealing with disaster response. So that's kind of how they framed up adaptation priorities in those 5 areas, themed areas. Are you or anyone else associated with CLIMAtlantic, are you part of any of the advisory tables that have been established by the federal government?
So not of the advisory tables, but because we're part of the Canadian Centre of Climate Services network of service centres, from my understanding, once the tables have done their initial work, we will be part of the engagement process. We as network of centres, because we're obviously a logical place to go to actually, have a specific engagement component. So that's my hope. I have talked to some of the organizations that participate in these tables, so I'm in contact, and we've had presentations at our Canada-wide meetings of the network on the National Adaptation Strategy process.
Yeah, okay, well, that's good because it's important, of course, that the national strategy be informed by experience on the ground in places, and certainly before the sort of recent spate of what I call unnatural disasters in BC in the last year. Certainly, I would hazard to say that Atlantic Canada between 2010 and 2020 had more or as many as some other parts of the country of unnatural disasters spread out over time, starting widely recognized, I think, starting with the deluge, the December deluge of rain concentrated in western Charlotte County in 2010. The headlines around that acknowledged that what we were seeing was a consequence of our destabilizing climate, and it just continued from there with unnatural storms and disasters in the region. And if you've lived through any of that, it is stressful, and things happen that you would never imagine could happen. A babbling brook beside a friend's house ends up looking like a raging river surrounding the house, threatening to carry it off over the bank into the bay. You know, that happened. It didn't carry it away, but that's how they ended up. Spent a terrible night while that was happening. Another friend's house got moved off of its foundations. Other people had never seen any flooding in their 125-year-old farmhouses through the generations, and that caused flooding because the groundwater, or the water table came up so immense. It was extraordinary. People blocked from getting into their homes. People blocked from because of road closures as the asphalt was carried away. So I guess it speaks to. I guess my concern a little bit here is we haven't done the New Brunswick Climate Risk Assessment or New Brunswick Adaptation Strategy, and the federal one is kind of galloping ahead. Do you have any sort of thoughts on that? Is that a problem, or is that all right?
I think that's okay. I mean, I think it will be informed by some of the regional experiences and expertise for sure, like the national one, I mean, but it'll also outline sort of a framework within which New Brunswick can place its own adaptation strategy. So it is not, you could see it both ways. It's backwards. It should be informed by the grassroots, which in this case are the regions or the provinces, territories. But the fact is that it'll be high level. It won't be as detailed as you would expect a provincial one would be, or as, you know, pointing to areas, specific areas, as the provincial ones will be. So I think it'll work out. It will work out fine, and it actually give the province something to look at. There will be items in there that are really important for New Brunswick to incorporate in its adaptation strategy. It will make all the difference for, let's say, funding, funding of infrastructure projects. Things will change once the adaptation strategy, the federal adaptation strategy, is approved. It will likely change in terms of how New Brunswick can access funding from the federal government.
I'm asking you how we should treat the dike works facing the Bay of Fundy in southeastern New Brunswick. What should be done to strengthen them or ensure that they don't let the Bay of Fundy in?
Well, my simple comment is get on with it. It's like, I live in Sackville, and I've known about this for the last 12 years now. Plus I did work on the first assessment of adaptation options for the Chickneck Isthmus. It's one of those national concern, infrastructure pieces of national concern. So there's a lot of work that will need to be done. This is millions and millions of dollars that 50 million go across there, I think, on a daily basis, but it's millions and millions of dollars of investment that need to be put in that region into the dikes, one way or another, whatever the options are. So my point is, it's urgent. Get on with it. All of those large infrastructure pieces, transportation infrastructure, they need to be looked at as a priority, especially if they link Canada or provinces to other areas in Canada. We've seen what supply chain interruptions can do. We're currently already living them. So that's my comment.
Well, thanks. That makes me think. I hope that what flows out of the National Adaptation Strategy is a pan-Canadian plan that includes federal provincial funding arrangements, because the scale of the investments are going to be large, but absolutely necessary and urgent, as we've seen already in New Brunswick, given the damage that's occurred so far. And that's nothing like what we scientists predict we're going to see in the future. So finally, I want to ask you about the Climate Change Fund, and in terms of adaptation, do you see a way of, I'm not going to ask for your priorities, but how to frame up the priorities? What kind of lens should be used to prioritize funding from the Climate Change Fund for adaptation?
Yeah, I think I should maybe mention, from the Environmental Trust Fund, a lot of funding has gone into the capacity building piece. So, to nonprofit organizations, to municipalities and so on, which is great, which are the smaller non-infrastructure pieces. But the Climate Action Fund, Action Fund has the opportunity of doing some pilot work, some larger pilot work that currently can't be done. And some municipalities have already done some of this pilot work on their own. And it's really complicated. And I think you'll hear from Sackville later on today, from the CEO from Sackville, about that. It's really complicated, really expensive. But these kind of things need to happen. We need to figure out how we can do those things better, what kind of things actually make sense. And the Climate Action Fund, I think, is an opportunity to invest in those. There's so much to be invested in. Currently you don't have the funding to cover all the infrastructure investments that are required across the province to make them climate resilient or climate safe or withstand the climate impacts. It's just not, their money's not there. So focus on at least the high risk areas or the areas in infrastructure that we know we need to figure out what to do with it as a priority.
And as you said, the climate risk assessment